Vinnie Mirchandani here. Real pleasure to have Grant Halloran today. He is CEO of Planful, formerly Host Analytics. We're going to talk a lot about planning, a lot about what has gone well in the last few weeks as people plan and replan, and trends in the planning sector going forward. Grant, welcome aboard. Thank you for joining me. Give us a little bit about yourself and about Planful, and then we'll jump into some of the questions.
Thanks so much, Vinny. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. So Grant Halloran. You can tell I do not have an American accent like you. So I am from Australia originally. I've been the CEO of Planful, as you mentioned, formerly Host Analytics. I've been on board just coming up on 1 year now. So it's been a very exciting last year and lots of different challenges, as you can imagine.
Your hair is not great.
Yeah. What's that?
You haven't grayed. Your hair is still okay.
Oh, yeah. Maybe having a couple of months at home has actually helped. But yeah, so I grew up in Australia, and I've been in the enterprise software industry for over 20 years. I've built a few companies that I co-founded with my brother when we were a lot younger, and that's what brought me out to the States. And I've worked for a number of large and very fast-growing enterprise software companies out here. First got exposed to this planning and analysis space back around 2015 when I was the CMO and of one of our competitors, and that's how I first got exposed to it. And I realized that there was a huge upswing in cloud adoption in financial planning and analysis. And so yeah, really excited to be leading this great company, and looking forward to our chat today, Vinny.
So Grant, it's been in all the doom and gloom of this last few weeks, we've seen some amazing acrobatics, right? Manufacturing companies, auto companies getting into medical ventilators, obviously healthcare heroics, banks doing 4 million small business PPP loans. I mean, just staggering numbers, a lot of innovation and so on. What acrobatics, what heroics have you seen in the customer base? I'm sure you've seen people just furiously replan stuff and so on, but tell us some of the heroics you've seen.
The first and very obvious one is a client of ours, Abbott. And Abbott's a large, complex organization, but the speed at which they
pharmaceutical
Abbott, pharmaceutical and diagnostics. So when you go into a medical, see your doctor for a common cold, or you got a sore throat or whatever, those tests that they do to test whether you have, say, strep throat or whatever, and the ability for them to test that within a few minutes, Abbott was able to effectively reappropriate that technology and develop the test for coronavirus, and that came out very early on. So typically you would imagine that type of endeavor might take probably in the years typically, and they were able to do that in a matter of weeks. So that's I think an example of a very large corporation being able to adjust so quickly, work in partnership with the federal government mainly around that to get that out. And that's been a game changer. We know that in the White House, the president gets one of those tests, I think, a couple times a day. They can get an answer in 5 minutes. So I would call that heroics. But another part of their business, which I think has been, which is interesting, has been we've heard a lot about companies that have been damaged and hurt by this. And of course, there are many, many millions of businesses that have been. Another part of Abbott has actually ramped up production. So they make sustenance products. They make Pedialyte, the children's nutrition drink. So they've actually had to increase their production because, the amount of run on those types of products has been quite significant. I think for us, you mentioned, we offer a platform in the cloud that enables, financial planning analysis. Every one of our customers, the users of our system, they're in many ways the first responders inside their businesses to this situation. So in late March, when this, the market started melting down, every CEO, every CFO was saying to that FP&A team, what is going on, what do we need to do, and that was multifaceted. One was like quickly run new scenarios. What's happening to our cash flow forecasting? What's going to happen to our sales outcomes? What do we need to do to adjust? And literally every one of our customers. A good example would be Bose, the sound system company everyone's familiar with. You know, they have stores, they have digital, they have supply chains, they have you know, an e-commerce business, and they had to really figure out very quickly, and they're using our platform to do it, very quickly, what are the different scenarios that might emerge here and what decisions do we need to take very quickly. Boston Red Sox, another really good example of a business that's completely impacted because they've effectively stopped.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, a lot of people obviously going through very stressful times, but I think it's demonstrated to us the ingenuity, the speed at which we can operate if necessary.
Yeah, right. You know, I've been interviewing a lot of people who've been on a downward scale. Delta Airlines, for example, is down to 5% capacity. And when you talk to the executives, it's not like they're sitting around. My God, that downscaling is almost more effort than upscaling, right? So even though they're hurting, it's taking heroics to be able to smooth it out and, you know, plan for the recovery and so on.
I've never been busier. I mean, I'll tell you that. I mean, I think when you get to the end of each day, you sometimes wonder whether you're as productive in the normal sense as you would be with a lot of the effort, but a lot of it has been crisis management, especially in the first few weeks and months.
You know, you talked about Bose, and I'm sure Abbott has had all kinds of issues. It seems like, I mean, you're mostly in FP&A, but it seems like operational planning, especially supply chains, have broken down, right? Obviously, if you're sourced from Asia, I'm sure Bose that has been impacted. If you're in the food business, the meat packing has become constrained. So it seems like every sector has had some supply chain issues. Is that an opportunity for Planful going forward?
Yeah, it's a great point. So we subscribe to Gartner's view of the world, what they call XP&A, which is extended planning analysis. So if you think about FP&A is historically been seen as a bit of a kind of service desk, right? The business units have questions, they go to the FP&A team, they ask them questions. And we've seen the trend towards more democratized business intelligence, but a lot of that is backward looking. It tells you what's happened in the past, and so it's answering those questions. Where systems like Planful come in is we tell you a lot more about what's going to happen in the future. We enable you to run all those what-if scenarios in a very, very coordinated and collaborative way, because it's all in the cloud, so you're not passing around spreadsheets and things like that. So yeah, whilst our platform, one of the unique things and market leading aspects of our platform is that we do that structured planning that you mentioned, right? The annual operating plan, the new forecast, we do all that financial reporting, but we complement that with what we call dynamic planning, which is the ability to take operational data more at the fine grain level, if you like. So SKUs, what's going to happen? So we have example of a client, Breville in Australia, which and they sell a lot of products and coffee machines and toasters and things here in the US. They use us for demand planning. They also use us for R&D capacity planning. Okay, so they've built models inside our system that enable them to go in and say what's going to happen over the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years. R&D is a multi-year outlook. And they can go in and run new scenarios, and they can reprioritize what they need to do. So if they believe that, you know, more folks are going to be staying at home these days, then I suspect they may have an assumption that they're going to sell more coffee machines. Going to be less people going out to buy their coffee, and they're going to be doing more at home. So maybe that means they prioritize some of the innovation that they wanted to do and bring that up in the schedule. So demand planning, yeah, definitely sales and operations planning, which is a very specific use case inside supply chain. And we have a lot of customers using us for that as well. Same store sales, right? E-commerce, when we have to mix more businesses are going, and I know you've interviewed a lot of people about this, is the digital transformation's accelerating. So how do we move our business far more online. We need to engage our consumer customers and our business customers far more in a digital way than we ever have before. So that's making your plan shift as well.
So sounds like you're going to have your hands full with new scenarios, new demand. Let me take you into another opportunity area, right? So, through this whole process, I live in Florida, and we're used to the National Hurricane Center. I've written case studies about them. The cone of uncertainty has become smaller and smaller because they get so much data from buoy sensors and hurricane hunters and satellites and so on, and the supercomputers that churn out the models. So we're used to evacuating maybe 200 miles of coastline when a hurricane's approaching. We don't evacuate the whole state. In the pandemic model, it seems like, A, we've evacuated way too much, and B, it's been unreliable, right? So we turned Javits in New York into a hospital. We sent the emergency Navy ship there. And within 4 weeks, we said, maybe we don't need them. I mean, it's just been chaotic.
Yeah.
How do we put your broader planning hat on? How do we do a better job next time there is a pandemic or another health-related issue? And where would you play a role in something like that?
I think it's a multifaceted and very complex question here. And I imagine there's going to be, and I hope there are going to be, bipartisan inquiries, not, Senate hearings and things like that. I really think that the magnitude of this, the scale of it for a health issue, the impact to society and every level is so big and so different that we really need to come together as a nation and as a world, in fact, and actually get bipartisan answers to these problems, right? I think a lot of folks in your audience might share this view that there's far too much partisanship and politicization of these things. And we need to get beyond that quickly. That's the first comment I'd make. The second is we're going to have a trove of data to go through. And I would say that experts that know how to analyze data need to spend a lot of time. It could be another year until we get some conclusions. Because what I've found is that it seems to change week to week in the way that data gets shared, right? So by the time it comes from the source and it eventually ends up at our eyeballs, it's been passed through so many different places and through the media and everything else, it's hard to actually understand what works. I'll give you an example which I think everyone would resonate with. Why is it that today in June, nearly end of June, so this has been around since February, right? Why is it today that the authorities saying we need you wearing masks, we need you to wear face coverings? Why wasn't that known beforehand? Coronaviruses have been around, SARS-1 was in early 2000. We've had, the common cold is a coronavirus. Now, of course, it's rarer to have novel coronaviruses, but don't we know that transmission through from our respiratory systems, transmission is, more likely to happen if you're not wearing a face covering? Like, why didn't we know that before? So these are the things that I think need to be answered going.
Or to your point, right? The taxonomy seems to vary from state to state. We still focus too much on the positives, when in fact we should really be looking at, our hospitals seeing a surge, and then how that ends up with fatalities. It seemed like the media is focusing a little too much on the positives, which is important. I mean, clearly that tells you the trend, but the real root cause is probably further down in the process. So yeah, I mean,
part of it, Vinnie, is a little bit, if there's a fire, in the corner of the room, you don't start analyzing what caused it, and
right.
First thing you got to do is go put it out, and then you can do your root cause analysis later on. I think a little bit of it is going to be timing here, and I think while we're all optimistic that the worst case scenarios that we were looking at in March and April have not emerged, and there's many factors for that. So I think we have some cause for optimism that, you know, things we have managed through, we're managing through it. I know we could have probably done a better job, but back to your question about what do we do going forward, I think that it's hard for me and you know, none of us are experts in this stuff. It's hard to know what will happen at the big macro and you know, political level. I'd say for businesses, though, two things are going to happen. One is the digital transformations are going to accelerate. And that's not just in the way that we engage customers, right? I have friends that run businesses where their whole business is moving online, right? They're literally going, and then maybe in the future they'll go back to, you know, selling in stores and whatnot, but they're fully going online. They realize they need omni-channel engagement. So that's at the front end of the business. But what about the back office? I mean, all these workers have had to go home, right? And, you know, I live in Silicon Valley, work in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of the companies here saying, well, this has been an unintended experiment that where we've learned a lot about productivity. And I can tell you, a lot of companies have become more productive. We don't know how sustainable that will be. But here's the point. I don't think we're going to go back to what it was in 2019 and before that. I think that society is going to change. Businesses are going to look to fortify their business continuity plans more. I think cloud adoption is going to, it was already obviously on a very steep upward trajectory, but I think it's going to dramatically accelerate as well.
A number of CIOs I've talked to have told me that clouds help the work from home a lot more than the on-premise systems. You know, they didn't have to worry about VPNs and tunneling and all that. Yeah.
Our clients, honestly, for them, it's been seamless. Like they've just said, they're used to interacting and collaboratively working inside this cloud system. When they went home, it was regular. I had one client say that, you know, this saved them because their workload went up. I mentioned Red Sox earlier. I mean, the Red Sox, prior to us, they would do 2 forecasts a year. So they do original plan, they do a reforecast, and, you know, make budget adjustments if necessary mid-year. Now they do that monthly. So if you think about, you know, there's work to do that. Well, how do you go from 2, you know, you've basically increased your workload by 6 times. So you need to be more productive. You need to be in the cloud. It needs to be collaborative. These are all the overheads that people often don't think about when you're at the office, and we're just structured that way. Yeah. So a lot of back office modernization is going to happen, and in a much more accelerated way.
So, you know, on the finishing up on the pandemic stuff, there's going to be, just like you say, tons new data sources, data taxonomies, and so on. Must be a great time to think about being a data scientist, right? I mean, we'll have so much data to sort through.
That's a really good question. I mean, I don't think businesses can get enough data scientists right?
Already.
I don't know what the latest is, but I do remember reading that McKinsey did a study a couple of years ago, and we were short by 500,000 data scientists. And so there is I think from a technology trend, there is this concept of democratizing data science, right? And being able to bring these abilities to build models, maintain models, bring them to regular business analyst type folks. I think that the promise of that the reality isn't quite there at the promise yet. I still think there is, we talk about featured, automated feature engineering. I don't think a lot of businesses I talk to are doing that yet, right? So it's still requiring a data scientist that understands that process. But yeah, you're right. This is the time. I mean, any kid that's looking to go to university and has a bent towards the math and science world, you probably want to go be a data scientist.
And medicine work, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
A CEO told me, he says, Vinnie, for 10 years, you guys have been saying we need to become a digital company. Now you're telling me we need to become a healthcare company. There's a lot of new opportunities and exposure They've suddenly become very, very. Grant, let's talk about the broader economy. Put on your CEO hat here. What do you see in terms of, is it going to be a sharp recovery, a V, or a gradual U, or is it going to be a W? You know, look at the global and the flare-ups are going to be all over the place.
Yeah.
Or is it going to be dead for a while and L?
I studied some economics back in the day at Australian National University. A very good economics faculty, but I'm not an economist, so I will give you.
Don't hedge.
I caveat what I say by saying, you know, who knows? But look, talking with a lot of CFOs who are our main stakeholders, I think it's going to be U-shaped. That would be my guess. I do think that leading into, I think two factors here. Leading into the pandemic, the systemic economy, there was no systemic issue. Like if you go back to 2008, we had a systemic problem with ratings, and you know there was a problem in the banking system itself, right? So I think this has been one of these black swan events that isn't systemic. That's the first thing. The second is I think the Fed has been, and Congress, to give them credit, they have been very fast at getting liquidity into the market. One can debate whether the programs have been executed the way that I think they could have been a little bit better, channeled and targeted a bit, a little less bureaucratic, frankly.
Yep.
But nonetheless, getting that liquidity in the market, the Fed, you know, basically underpinning a lot of corporate bonds and things, has been very rapid and of a magnitude that we've not really seen before. So I think that assuming we can get through the COVID stuff and the shelters in place and these, you know, the phases we're going through, if we can get through that, and so we're around late summer, September, October, we're starting to get back to a more flourishing economic activity, I think it's going to be U-shaped. I think 2021 will be way better than this year, but maybe not as good as it could have been economically if this hadn't happened. But I think by the end of 21, and a lot of CFOs agree with me, they feel like it's going to be a quick but then gradual upswing back to where we were before.
You know, talking about CFOs, it must just be a crushing time, right? Because they're looking at writing off assets and looking at new revenue models. I mean, you've talked to a number of them. What's the sense you're getting? They are under almost too much pressure, or are you sensing, you know, the tools are helping them do the scenarios and so on much better than they would have in 10 years ago?
Yeah, it's a good question, Vinnie. Very stressful time. Very stressful. We've got to also be empathetic that these folks and their teams are, you know, they're human beings and they're at home just like a lot of us, and dealing with the family, the kids are at home, and they also have, you know, elderly parents and whatnot. So there's a lot of a human aspect to this that I think can't be underestimated, that stress makes things more difficult for us. And so immeasurably challenging time for them. I think there's been a realization that it's been really hard to predict the future. Everyone I've spoken to says, I don't know what's going to happen next week. I don't know what's coming out next week. I don't know because we've got politicians involved making decisions, and those decisions have, you know, small windows, and then we don't know what the next decision is going to be. You know, markets don't function very well with uncertainty. Yeah. And so I think that realization has led them to understand that the thing you do in response to that is you have to be much more agile. You have to be very, very, you know, high frequency in the way you analyze your business and decide what the next steps are going to be. So I think it's become a lot more incremental. You know, no one wants to go out, and no one likes laying off employees, right? And then the thing is, we didn't know how long shelter in places would happen for, right? So it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And our clients, the lens that we look at the world through with the business of Planful is try to become a continuous planning organization, which means get more people involved in the process, lubricate that information flow in the business. So we enable that to happen and dramatically increase the frequency at which you are reforecasting, doing new scenarios, working with your budget owners. That's the only thing you can do in this situation.
I placed your strength. You know, Marc Benioff said yesterday, I don't know if it was a Freudian slip or he goes, you know, I don't know if it's a pandemic or an epidemic, because he said we've gone from a health crisis to a financial crisis to a, you know, protest crisis. So he was like, I don't think I've ever seen so many come right one after another. So that's why he said it's an epidemic, which plays to your strengths, right? I mean, continuous forecast and just, you know,
it's all about high frequency decision making, and that's very complex to do, and it's very collaborative. So I think that's why. I mean, I have to tell you that and I would not wish the cause. I certainly don't wish that this happened, right? But we are here to help companies, and in May we've had the highest amount of inbound demand in any month for the last 2 years. So I think there's a realization that, hey, you know, we got to do something differently here moving forward.
Well, you know, and times like this, customers remember who they leaned on, and so kudos to you for delivering. Grant, any final thoughts?
Well, I would just say that I am an optimist. I think that we are making good directional progress in all of the things we just talked about. While it's challenging and difficult for all of us as humans and business folks and everything else, I do believe we'll emerge stronger. I believe we'll learn a lot more than we knew before. And, you know, I believe in my company that we will emerge stronger and more bonded as a group and a culture. So there is a lot of positive outcomes that we can hopefully see coming down the road here.
Fantastic, Grant. Thank you for your optimism. Thank you for sharing all the CFO stresses and so on. Thanks a lot. Stay healthy.
It's great to see you. Stay healthy too. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.